Hello and welcome to the video. This is Matthew and we are going to be looking at question 12, which is a 30-mark question. So question 12 tells us about a farmer who plants apple trees in a square pattern, and he must plant coniferous trees all around these apple trees. We are shown a diagram of the situation where we can see a pattern of both the apple trees and coniferous trees for any number n of rows of apple trees. So the X's are the coniferous trees and then the black circles are apple trees. So now let's go down to the first part of the question, part A, and let's see what it asks. So part A is worth 5 marks and asks us to draw the next stage in the pattern. So this should be fairly straightforward, so we just have to count the pattern for the apple trees and also for the coniferous trees. So we can see in the first pattern there, n is equal to 1, we can see that there is one apple tree. And then there are 8 coniferous trees. In the second pattern, there are 4 apple trees and 16 coniferous trees. And then in the third pattern, there are 9 apple trees and 24 coniferous trees. So you may be able to see a pattern there, particularly with the apple trees. So there's 1, 4, 9. So the next pattern will have 16 apple trees. So we can put those in for the start. So there we have our 16 apple trees, and now for the coniferous trees around these apple trees. So as I said, the first pattern had 8, the second had 16, the third one had 24, so if you notice these are going up in 8s. Therefore our fourth pattern, which is the one we're drawing, should have 32. So 32 divided by 4 is 8, that means it should have 8 on each side. So let's draw those in now. So there we have it, that is the next stage in the pattern with 16 apple trees and 32 coniferous trees. So that's part A of the question, and as I said, it's very straightforward. So now let's move on to part B of the question. So part B is worth 10 marks, and it asks us to fill in a table with the number of apple trees and the number of coniferous trees for the first 5 stages of the pattern. So we know we have the pattern for stage 3, and we've drawn the pattern for stage 4. So we know the number of apple trees in stage 3 is 9, and the number of apple trees in stage 4 is 16. Now you may be able to see a pattern here. So 1, which is just 1 squared, 4, which is 2 squared as it's the second pattern, 9 is 3 squared as it's the third pattern, 16 is 4 squared as it's the fourth pattern. So I'm sure you're seeing the pattern now. So the fifth pattern should have 25, which is obviously 5 squared. So now for the number of coniferous trees, so obviously 8 is given. Then for the second pattern, we can count 16. For the third pattern, we can count 24. And for the fourth pattern, we can count 32. Now again, you may notice a pattern here, so it's increasing by 8 every time. So 8, 16, 24, 32. So therefore, our next pattern will have 40. So that's our answer for part B. Very straightforward. The only pattern that you may have slight difficulty with is number 5 here. But the rest of them are very straightforward because you're just literally having a look at the patterns we're given and our answer from part A and filling in the blanks then. But 5 slightly harder, but still nothing too difficult there. So now let's move on to part C. So part C is worth 5 marks, and it says that Patrick is claiming that the number of apple trees, the pattern of the number of apple trees I should say, is quadratic, and Patrick is correct. So now we have to prove that he is correct. So let's draw out our pattern first of all. So we started with 1 apple tree, then we had 4, then we had 19, 16, and finally 25. So now we're going to get the first difference, so the first difference and then the second difference. And as it's quadratic, the second difference should be the same every time. So let's try it. So our first difference, so 1 and 4 will be 3. First difference between 4 and 9 will be 5. Between 9 and 16 will be 7. And then between 16 and 25 will be 9. So now this part here, the second difference should be the same. So the difference between 3 and 5 is 2. The difference between 5 and 7 is also 2. And the difference between 7 and 9 is 2 as well. So therefore, as the second difference is the same, the pattern is quadratic. So that's our answer for part C. Now let's have a look at part D. So part D, the question is worth 5 marks. And we have to find a formula for the number of apple trees at stage n. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just to draw out a quick table of the number of apple trees at each state of the pattern. So let me just draw that out now. So there we have our table. So n is the stage in the pattern, and then that symbol there that looks like the hashtag symbol is the number of apple trees. So at stage, so we're going to do stages 1, 2 and 3. And we know that we know from our answer from part B that at stage 1 there was 1 apple tree, at stage 2 there was 4, and at stage 3 there was 9. So now what we have to work out is how do we go from 1 to 1. So obviously there's a few different ways to go from 1 to 1. You can just multiply 1 by 1, divide 1 by 1, 1 plus 0. There's a lot of different ways. So that doesn't really help us. We're going to have a look at 2 to 4 now. So obviously we can multiply 2 by 2 plus 2 with 2, or 2 squared. And then we have, how do we go from 3 to 9? So we can plus 3 and 6, multiply 3 by 3, which is the same thing as 3 squared. So the one thing that they have in common is 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, and 3 squared is 9. So let's try that. So therefore we can say that at stage n, the number of apple trees will be n squared. So that is our answer for part D of the question. So now part E is also worth 5 marks. And we're doing the same thing again, but this time for the number of coniferous trees. So once again, I'm going to draw out a quick table, which will help us with this. So again, it's going to be the same thing again. So we're going to have the first 3 stages of the pattern, 1, 2, and 3. Then the number of coniferous trees will be in the third column there. And then once again, we know from either counting them again or from our answer from part B, we know that at the first stage of the pattern that there was 8 coniferous trees. At the second stage, there was 16. And at the third stage, there was 24. So now we have to work out how we go from the first one there to 8, from the second pattern to 16, and then from the third one to 24. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the common difference, which here is 8, and we can go from 8 to 8 by multiplying it by 1, and again 8, and we're going to multiply it by 2, and then again 8, and multiply it by 3 to get 24. So then we can tell that it's just 8 multiplied by n, or 8n. That's how we work out the number of coniferous trees at stage n. So I'm going to write that down now. So at stage n, the number of coniferous trees is 8n. Because we can see a pattern there. We're just going to multiply 8 by the number of the pattern that we're trying to find. So therefore, the number of coniferous trees is equal to 8n. So that's part E of the question. Now let's move on to the final part of the question, part F. So part F is worth 5 marks as well. So it's telling us that there is a value of n for which the number of apple trees is the same as the number of coniferous trees. So we can use our answers from part D and E or otherwise to find the value of n for which the number of coniferous trees and apple trees is the same. So in other words, basically it's asking us at what stage of the pattern is the same number of apple trees in the orchard as coniferous trees. So to do this, we're going to put n squared is equal to 8n. So there's a few different ways we can do this, but I think we're just going to divide both sides by n to get rid of the n on the right hand side. So then we'll get n squared over n is equal to 8. Now n squared divided by n is just n, so therefore we get n is equal to 8. And that is our answer. So now, as you will see in the marking scheme, there is a different way to do it. There's a few different ways to do it, but in my opinion this is the simplest way. And we got our answer 8. So that's the end of the question and the end of the video. I hope I helped, and thank you very much for watching.